in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast.
So cortisol goes up, clear it. Just go for a walk, do some slow control breathing, get it to come down, calm yourself down, watch the stress go away.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today, I'm joined by Brian McKenzie, where we talk all things human performance with a focus on how shifting the way you breathe can help shift your physiology. Brian McKenzie is an expert in physiology optimization. His work harnesses and integrates respiratory, movement, strength, conditioning, and endurance-based training approaches to elicit maximal human performance. He has used his protocols to optimize his own athletic performance and improve the mental and physical performance of world-class Olympic and professional athletes, top executives, and elite military operators, as well as to improve the health of people suffering from various chronic and pathological issues. Brian is the creator of CrossFit Endurance and has authored a number of New York Times bestsellers. His programs have been featured seemingly everywhere, from Outside Magazine to Runner's World, Triathlete Magazine, and ESPN Rise. This conversation was super fun because Brian has done a deep dive into physiology and learning how everything in the body is kind of impacted by different physiological systems and how everything is interconnected. So he landed on determining that the breath or breathing was something that is very controllable and something that we can change. And that has a massive impact on our physiology, our mental well-being, and other things like that. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation I had with Brian McKenzie about maximizing human potential and shifting your physiology through proper breathing. Brian McKenzie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and in such short notice too. I think we started the conversation like Friday of last week, and you were like, and you booked for a Tuesday. So I was like, oh shoot, I better do my research and see what I can come up with, because I gotta get some good questions for Brian.
The funny thing, I went out like 2 weeks from now, and I was like trying to look, and there was nothing. But 2 weeks from now, like in a week, I actually have surgery. So I'm not gonna I'm having some sinuplasty done, so I'm having this thing fixed.
Yeah.
Which I didn't think was an issue, but I can get into that when we get into the breathing stuff. At any rate, this was the day, because I'm like, oh, this is all he's got that I've got on my schedule, so let's just do this.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate you being willing to be on the podcast and everything. And I was telling you offline, one of the friends of the show is Michelle Simmons, and her and I recently released, a really good episode all on breathing, and your name got brought up. But you do a lot more than just breath work and other things like that. I think I described it as kind of unlocking human potential. So, Brian, for the listeners who haven't heard of you before, could you give me like just a brief overview of like maybe a little bit of like endurance or just sport background history, what got you interested in kind of human potential, and then what you're doing now and how you're using that to develop more human beings into better human beings?
Yeah, I grew up in Orange County, skateboarding, surfing, etc. in the 80s, primarily, and the 90s, obviously. But I was I started getting older then. But I was also a short course sprinter in swimming, and I played water polo. And that was the kind of impetus for the drive towards human performance. However, my background began really with all this stuff when my father created a garage gym, like I think it was probably 1991.
Nice.
And he got into powerlifting. And so I got into powerlifting because he was lifting weights, and I didn't want my dad lifting heavier weights than me because I was becoming a man. my friends and I started doing really stupid shit in the gym. We were doing like 20 rep squat sets with like weight that you could normally only do 10. We just support each other and, just there's an old school, you may know about it, but there's an old school way of lifting that guys would do these atrocious squat sets with like 20 reps.
What
Uh,
there was a bodybuilder back in the day who was like 1 or 2 sets till failure. I'm pretty sure that's what comes to mind when you say that. But that does sound
yeah,
awful.
that was it. I mean, we'd literally be blacking out at 20
Yeah.
reps.
Yeah.
Like your nervous system was just shutting you down at that point. At any rate.
And
Um,
you're still here.
Yeah, and I'm still here. That said, I'm just laying a foundation for why I ended up getting into CrossFit. So
Yeah.
I I got into training, started training people, but I was mentored by a Russian scientist by the name of Nicholas Romanov, created the pose method of running.
Mhm.
Um, Spent many years with him, under him, learned from him, changed the way I looked at movement. I became kind of a specialist in understanding movement. Namely, I was fixing broken runners very early on in my career. I got into triathlon right when I started training people
Mhm.
because I got hooked into it. And being a swimmer, I obviously did well on the swim. I did okay on the bike, and then I got absolutely demolished on the run. I was passed by several overweight people for the first time in my life as an athlete,
Yep.
who encouraged me to continue going, which humbled me greatly, and I continued to chase the endurance bug. There, I continued to lay foundation in endurance training, triathlon, etc. Ended up doing one Ironman in Canada, and then I read an article on the way home from Ironman Canada, because we lived in Southern California, and I was reading this article on uh, these guys running ultra marathons in the middle of the mountains. These guys
Mhm.
running 1,500-mile runs. Now,
Mhm.
this is 2004. This
Before ultra marathons were a thing.
this isn't like yesterday, or everybody knows what an ultra marathon is now.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what an ultra marathon was back then, and I was like, who is doing this, and how do I get involved?
Yep.
Or how do I do it? And I started figuring it out. Ended up doing a number of events, pacing people at some pretty extreme events. I got a very good taste of things that I am now using in my tool shed for
Mhm.
athletes, which we're all hearing about. Things like heat training or sauna training, cold training, etc., altitude stuff. Like I had to actually figure that stuff out in order to survive at many of these events.
Yeah,
So
because I imagine back in the day, those ultra marathons were a little bit more rustic in.
they were, yeah, most of them were grassroots, except for the Western states was the only one that was not really grassroots, which
Mhm.
everybody wanted to do. Anyway, I done Western states, but I also did one out here in Southern California, which was very, very grassroots. Like maybe one person at the aid station in the middle of nowhere. Like, oh yeah, like so
Yeah.
I'm not going to drop. I'm just going to keep going.
Right, right.
Anyway, I never lost sight of my background in strength and conditioning
Mhm.
and strength work. I started to fall apart right around the end of my triathlon training, which was
Mhm.
in 2004. I was just starting to dwindle down, getting really thin, but I wasn't losing body fat. I was getting fairly unhealthy. I was getting colds all the time. Blood work wasn't optimal. And then I basically started retraining things. Granted, I was working with Romanoff at the time. He had me looking at things very differently, like intensity and strength and conditioning. And he really got me to start thinking about things differently. So I started screwing around with things myself, ended up developing a program for myself and my coaches, and then my athletes. And that became what was CrossFit endurance.
Mhm.
I ended up having such extreme success with what we were doing, it just took off like a rocket ship with people. They were just getting better results than they thought they could get with a lot of things. Granted, what we were doing with a lot of people was just basically sharpening the sword.
Right.
And you know, that it was great and I had a great time doing it, but I ended up getting involved with CrossFit as well, which is where the name CrossFit Endurance came from. I didn't really have a name for what I was doing.
Right.
And I was a subject matter expert for CrossFit as the CrossFit Endurance guy. Did that for about a decade before I departed. And then I just kept doing my own thing, evolving things, ended up getting into respiratory physiology, the breathing thing, as we started off with. And I about 10, 12 years ago, somebody threw a resistance training device at me and my head popped when I put it on because I sat up and changed the position and I instantly knew based on mechanics that I just organized myself much differently as a result. So there was something to that I wasn't looking at. So I went down the rabbit hole, studied a bunch on respiratory physiology, then started looking at the neurobiology of breathing and how that actually works. And then really found myself on an island with all of that stuff in terms of, oh, there's nobody actually incorporating this into human performance. Why is that? Like, why are we only doing this with yoga? You know, anyway, so there's the kind of intro into all of this. I love performance. I love to go hard, but I also enjoy being totally present in what I'm doing. And I can be going long and doing that. I could also be going very hard in doing that, you know, with weights and stuff. But the moment that where my work's at now, and this is where I connect with most people I work with, including athletes, is the moment presence is gone, the moment I'm starting to drift, that's a pretty darn good sign that things are off and it's time to cut it. So at any rate,
Yeah. That's super. So that a way of you gauging, when to stop workouts and when enough volume is enough volume there?
most of the time, yeah. Most of the time.
That,
Sometimes I'm just doing it for a time period that I've got. And I'm just looking at what I've done, understanding what I've done. I mean, look, I do an insane amount of data gathering, especially on myself. But I mean, I know right now on a weekly basis what my resting metabolic rate is, what my output is, what my inactive time is, active time is, what my fat percentage, versus carbohydrate burn is. I know all of this stuff pretty fine-tuned. Obviously, we could always fine-tune it a little bit more. But I've got it down to a very, very tight science of understanding how much intensity, load, duration I can handle. It really, a lot of things are just put on a time frame, but other things are, I will go out and push it. Here's how long I plan to go out. I'm going to push it this hard during this, but if things start to peter out, I definitely will cut down or cut it.
Yep. Yeah. I like that philosophy. That's something that I want to think that I've learned, but I have not fully realized in myself quite yet. Like when you said, you started to kind of fall apart, even during your triathlon and Ironman days. I have been kind of dealing with, lower back issues and hip issues and other things like that lately. And it's one of those things, like I'm 30, 31 years old, and I don't want that to be the defining portion of, of who I am as an athlete, right? Is being so limited that I can't do things like lift heavy or squat or deadlift or, do things like that. And I've had to really reduce it. So part of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to rehab that a lot. And I don't necessarily want to do, crazy surgery to get back fused or labrum replaced or other things like that. So I'm like, there's got to be ways that I can implement better movement patterns in order to actually, and safer movement patterns in order to actually, be able to continue to do what I like to do. Because it's so funny. You're the only thing that has kind of really been different in terms of you and my athletic path is I started out running, and that was like my big thing. So I ran, and I was a wrestler for 1 year in high school. So I did that, and that was my first kind of love. And then I got into triathlons because some guy was just like, "Hey Phil, I think you'd be really good at Ironman triathlons." And this was like back in 2011 or something like that. So I think in 2012 I did the one Ironman that I ever did. It was the Ironman Louisville, and it was an awesome experience, but I only did one of them, and there's a reason why, because it just kicked my butt. Um, and then I did uh CrossFit. So not CrossFit endurance, but I had heard of CrossFit endurance, but I did CrossFit for the last like 3 years when I was doing my PhD. And that was awesome because of the community that was developed and, like the encouragement of just getting people to lift more weights and be kind of well-rounded individuals and other things like that. And then it last May, I did my first ultra, which was a 50K. So when you're like describing this, I'm like, well, I wasn't quite there when in the grassroots stages of things, but I'm like, oh, huh, my journey is a little parallel to Brian's
I
in a
wasn't
sense.
in the grassroots stages of it. Like there were people who had been doing it for lifetimes, it seemed, when I got there. Anyway,
Right.
we
And
all
it's wild too. Like you probably met a bunch of like grizzled old veterans, in like the ultra running space, and they were like, "Oh, back in my day, which was like 5, 10 years ago, it was like we were bushwhacking to get through and do these races and all that sort of stuff."
Yeah, I remember the first 50 miler I did. There was a guy running who had a Windex bottle full of water. That was his water bottle.
It was before water bottles were even a thing, right? It
Water
was-
bottles were a thing, but that's just how like backwoodsy a lot of these people were.
Are you sure it wasn't actually Windex and he thought it was like the secret
Well,
sauce
it
to
wasn't
winning?
blue. It was definitely clear, but I was like, I mean, I specifically remember running with this guy and just being like, what is going on right now? What
Yeah.
is happening?
Oh man. That's really that's really funny. So I absolutely love that. So it's like I think at least for a lot of us who are kind of pursuing like athletic performance and stuff, it starts with our performance, and then we start to get interested in like the different principles behind things and like maybe the technology that's associated with it. And then we're like, well, I don't want to just keep this all to myself. How do I actually help other people, and start to be able to implement and help them use it? But before we get to that, you you said you do a lot of testing and stuff on yourself. What sort of technology are you using on like a weekly basis, and what do you find is like the most beneficial and applicable to, kind of like you as a person? Because there's so much out there. It's like, how do you sift through it?
Um, I don't think there's any one technology I could say. I would say the best tool we've got is our breathing.
Hmm.
That's the easiest way to understand things. And I can, I mean, and I'll probably give you and the audience some walk away points to understand with what I'm saying. However, you know, that's the thing I'm looking at regardless of the technology, right? Like, if I've got like, I mean, I've got a metabolic cart. I test lactate levels. I do near infrared spectroscopy. I do, what else do I got? I got HRV, heart rate monitors. I'm probably missing one or two things, but whatever. It's all fun, but and the thing is like, if you're using a technology, like I really am like, okay, well, why am I using this? What am I trying to do? Because if I've got all of those things on,
Hmm.
what are we doing?
Right.
Right? What data? Where you're not going to find a whole lot of crossover in there. However, one of the interesting things that I've essentially, why I said breathing is such a great tool, is breathing affects all of those things.
Hmm.
Breathing we can control, but breathing has an influence over everything that's going on, nervous system or how we're using oxygen, right?
Hmm.
So now it's not going to totally impact bioenergetics, but bioenergetics is a byproduct of the air I'm taking in, right? And the air I'm getting rid of, right? Like like all of that works together. Anyway,
Hmm.
heart rate's a funny thing. It's a good tool, but it's a very interesting thing, and I get a good kick out of people who, like the whole heart rate zone 2 thing, and people like really being so hell bent on that and really talking about a heart rate zone 2. And it's like, yeah, you're talking about training the heart. You're not talking about metabolically.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could show you days that you're burning fat well beyond that or well below that, right? And if you've got somebody on a metabolic cart enough, that. If you see
Right.
that, you definitely see that, right? But and it's just, hey, if you're going to train heart rate, train heart rate. That's great. Like, you're going to train your heart to do
Right.
specific. But if we're talking about fat burning, well, you might want to get a lactate meter, which is cheaper than a metabolic cart, so you can just understand exactly where that deflection point is and back off or bring it up just a bit. So at any rate, I think that answers your question. It's just, like they all work. It's just what am I trying to find? And I think that's the most important thing. And that'll be part of, the other things that, the questions that you've got for things is that, what limiters, you got to prioritize the limiters. You don't have to. But
Right.
if you do prioritize your limiters, you're going to have a problem.
Yep.
Meaning, you're going to end up coming back around to that.
Yep. No, I 100% agree. And that's how I kind of describe the use of technology is you have to know what that technology is measuring and what you can use it for. Because if you're just measuring stuff to measure stuff, then you're just kind of clogging your brain with more data that you have no idea what to do with, and it's not giving you any actionable direction to go. So you're always kind of just zigzagging back and forth as opposed to taking a straight path. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're talking, you were talking about, some days if we're measuring somebody on a metabolic cart, you have a massive amount of, say, fat oxidation that's occurring. If you were just using heart rate, it's like, well, you're probably not maximizing fat oxidation all the time because some days it's going to be higher. Other days, let's say you're stressed out, you had a bunch of carbohydrates like immediately beforehand, you're shutting down fat oxidation already. So your fat max is going to be way lower, than that actually is. So it's a little bit too much of an extrapolation for people to be like, oh, well, I was working at fat max today at 132 beats per minute. It's like, well, no, you were exercising at 132 beats per minute. Yes, maybe it's a good estimate, an aggregated estimate, but you really don't know, what your substrate utilization was unless you're actually measuring it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. The wonderful thing about that is that you can get you can get a better sense if you actually deploy the fundamentals of breath work or breath control into things and start paying attention to that. Because you'll see the breathing change, like that ventilatory threshold 1. Like, if you can do enough work to where you're playing with your breathing, with your training and what you're doing, you'll start to pick up on when that VT1 happens, right? And that's a very great indication, especially if you want to go look at research, et cetera, of where those changes are starting to happen. If you don't have any, if you don't want to spend the money on a lactate meter or a metabolic cart.
Yeah. No, I think so. There's a couple things. One of the things is that I am really starting to come around to the idea of, more focused breath work and paying attention to your breath when you're exercising and other things like that. Because, like you said, it is controllable, and the way you're breathing affects pretty much every other physiological system in your body. You can't control what your heart's doing. You can't think and be like, okay, heart beat slower. You can't think and be like, okay, muscle, use less oxygen. But you can control, okay, right? You can control that. And you can control how deep your breathing is, how wide your breathing is, like how forceful it is, other things like that. So there is definitely something to say about your ability to control your breathing and, the different rates. Because I've, as I said, been getting into more of this breathwork stuff. And it is really interesting when you do like a step test with people. There are some people you can kind of tell when they're about to have a panic attack, when they have the mask on and other things like that, because they start breathing super rapidly. they're breathing super shallowly. Everything else is coming up, right? And then they're ripping the mask off, being like, oh my gosh, I felt like I was being suffocated. It's like, you weren't actually being suffocated, but because of the way you were breathing and how that was affecting, the mental aspect of things, that's where your brain turned. So I've had to have discussions with those types of athletes where it's like, okay, when you get into that situation, I need you to try to control your breathing, breathe deeper, breathe more forcefully, do things like that in order to kind of avoid that getting into that panic breathing that, could potentially happen. And then on top of that, that's most likely going to then reduce your heart rate, which is going to then reduce a little bit to some extent your internal physiological strain and could help you reestablish some level of control and metabolic homeostasis, right? Going
All the
forward.
resources are going out the door.
What?
All your resources are going out the door at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, yep, everything is going downhill. And no, so going back to like the ventilatory threshold one, right? That first kind of change or uptick in breathing, at least from my understanding, that is driven by increases to CO2. Increases in CO2 are going to then trigger your brain to breathe, or your body to breathe a little bit faster. So if you can start to monitor and figure out where those small changes are happening, you don't have to go out and buy an $800 device, lactate strips, a metabolic cart that could cost up to $50,000 to be able to know that. But it does require some level of being in tune with what that feels like and what that breathing pattern is that is actually, leads to the changes. So I guess if you want, like, what are you looking for? And I'm sure it's much more detailed than what we have to go into, on this podcast, but what are you looking for, say, example, that first transitionary point or boundary?
So I am watching somebody's respiration rate,
Mm-hmm.
depth. So, with depth, right? So tidal volume, like what's going on, how deep they're getting and how fast they're going. All right.
Yep.
Now, it doesn't matter the first time I test somebody what that is. And this is what I try and explain to people. Like I got a new kid coming over on Friday who, I'm like, I went over everything with him. I'm like, look, I know you're young, you are fit, and I'm going to run you through a battery of assessments. We're going to be doing certain things. You can't win at this. There is nothing to win. This is me gathering data to start with to know what is the biggest limitation in terms of what you're telling me you want.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's telling me they want to go run a marathon, right? Or they want to go do X. They want to go into selection for special force, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Or you got an executive, right? They want to just be healthy. Okay, great. Let's see where this goes. And, by and large, what I look like, I actually have people run through a couple of assessments before they even get on an assault bike to do a test, because I typically like to do an assault bike because it's full body.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got the arms or an echo bike or an Airdyne, whatever. Anyway, it's got the arms and legs involved. So the whole body is really involved. But what I'm looking for is speed and depth, and then when those markers change, and then how long they can hang on at the end, and what that looks like at the end. So the other big thing here is that, which we haven't even gotten in really to the breathing thing, but breathing. So we've talked, like I brought up the zone 2 thing, right? I mean, what's interesting is people don't really know what the zone 2 is, but they do know this. They're like, okay, so it's like, it could be between these heartbeats, but it's a conversational pace.
Mm-hmm.
What I've really uncovered is that if you're having a conversation and you're in what is zone 2, you're not in zone 2.
Is it?
You're over breathing.
Okay.
Your mouth has to be, if your mouth is open, there is a difference, and you'll need a high level metabolic card for this. We're talking like Cosmed, like at a university, but
yeah,
we'll see. If I'm nose breathing under moderate levels of exercises, I am doing real well. The moment I open my mouth, that changes things quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that change in and of itself is part of that acid-base balance of what's going on, how oxygen's getting used, but that's under moderate levels of intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, yes, mouth breathing happens. So the interesting thing that I've found since everybody's gotten onto this nasal breathing thing is that there's these people who will hang on to nose breathing as long as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
At which point they're now doing the opposite of what they would have been doing if they were mouth breathing early on, right? So they're actually retarding things, but on the other end, like they're literally not they're not onboarding enough oxygen because now they're getting fully anaerobic, right?
Okay. That is actually, that's a perfect point, because I had somebody reach out to me and they were like, oh yeah, I nose breathe for like the entire time. And when I go and I do a VO2 max test, I'm estimated to have a VO2 max of 50. But then when I actually go and I do the test with the mask, my VO2 max is only 30. And I was like, man, I think
No,
because
yeah, you are
you're,
right. Okay, so no, I've witnessed this.
yeah.
I've not corrected, but I've just educated people on it. You know, and it's like what you tend to see with this is that even if people do end up mouth breathing, because I'll tell them, hey, it's okay to mouth breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, go ahead, they'll do it, but they'll get to 35, 40 breaths a minute, and that's they fall off right after that. Like they're done.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the ability to get to 50 breaths a minute and move that for a minute, right? That is serious work, right?
Yeah.
And that requires everything you've got, but without shortening it. Not like it's moving air a lot, and that is a very hard thing to do. This is something I will just the simple example is if you go watch the Tour de France or Giro d'Italia and you watch these guys finishing a mountain section, you will see them breathing at those types of rates.
Right.
Those, and that's where it goes. So breathing has this transcending thing that happens, but I like to just pick up where the breathing gets. Where the numbers I'm looking for is when it goes from under 20 above 20, and then it happens around the 40 mark.
Okay. And you're trying to figure out, does all of a sudden does tidal volume just collapse and then VE just go way down? Or are there other transitions where, it's like shallower breathing or other, sort of points like that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of nuanced stuff, but largely that's what I'm starting to look at is how deep, how fast, what's going on, and how's that actually correlating to metabolically what's going on. So how much CO2 output's going on. And I mean, if we get into the, energy of it, it's like, well, when does more CO2 start to occur? Like, when will I produce more CO2? Well, when you get anaerobic, when you're burning through, when you're incinerating carbohydrates.
Yeah, and not taking them into your mitochondria, right? That's like the big difference.
Correct. When you're in linear mode, like you are outside of the cell, you are not inside of the cell anymore. You're trying to buffer everything going on with any oxygen that's coming in. Getting people to start to understand that, and then being able to strategize with them appropriately, meaning if I've got a guy who's pretty ego driven and wants performance over everything, that's a real hard sell on a lot of things I'm doing, but I mean, look, it's interesting because I just had a buddy of mine send me over a mug shot of him. He's like, dude, I can't keep weight on right now. All inflammation is going away. And he goes, dude, like, this is a guy who's an MMA guy. He's like Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, rolls every night, does toe-in surfing. He's over in Hawaii. I mean, he's just going full throttle all day, every day. And then at the end of the day, he's rolling, right? So he's in a sport that's highly glycolytic, right? So at any rate, I tested him, and we basically established, hey man, what are you capable of doing? Can you walk 30 minutes in the morning when you wake up? He's like, yeah, that's it. I'm like, well, let's start there. And then I need you to get on a bike or walk for 20 minutes after you do anything hard, like rolling, or you've been towing in all day, like 4 hours of tow in. I need you to go get on a bike and just move things. for 20 minutes, slow, heart rate under 110. Just make it easy.
Yeah.
He did it. And he's been doing this for like 3 months now. And this is a guy who's 250 pounds, right? He's like in 34 board shorts now. He's like, dude, what is going on? But he's still he's shredded.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you just turned on the energy source, bro. You got the mitochondria functioning again, and you're not all stressed out. Like you're just not all day burning through sugar.
I think there's going to be a lot of people who are like, oh, there's no way that just breathing could change that, blah, 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 blah. But I also think there's a lot of people who are in my sort of situation where they're extremely stressed out all the time. Like I said, I'm in my 30s now, and
walking. It may be more, but
yeah,
mouth is shut. You're not on your phone, and that's the deal.
Right. So it's
do that.
Yeah. No. This is something I keep my phone on silent all the time because when your phone is constantly dinging, it makes for a reactive life, right? You're like, oh, I gotta get to that, right? You know, you see my movements, and it's like very herky jerky, like, oh, I gotta react. Whereas if you put your phone down, you know, kind of switch from the mouth breathing to the nose breathing, and this is something. So from a physiological perspective, how is that nose breathing changing, say, sympathetic, parasympathetic tone versus if you're doing mouth breathing?
The moment you open your mouth, you move into more sympathetic tone. The moment you shut your mouth and you're breathing through your nose, you move into parasympathetic tone. So that means if you're doing real aerobic work and your mouth is open, you've now moved into more sympathetic tone because it's not because the mouth opens, it's because we're off gassing CO2. Right. So if real simple, your listeners just want to push pause for a second, take 10 breaths through your mouth right now. Like that. The moment you start to feel lightheaded, here's what happened. Your sympathetic nervous system said, okay, dum-dum, if you keep doing that, I'm going to clamp down on the vasculature going to the brain so I can protect it so that it'll keep using oxygen, because right now you're not using oxygen because you just screwed up the dissociative curve that's going on, right? And it's not saying dissociative curve. The knowledge of our biology is so advanced, it can't be improved. We're the only ones that can really excuse the language, fuck this up. The minds are what screw everything up, right? That's why you go look at a lion or a zebra or whatever animal, and you go, it's perfect. Like, look at that thing. It's just a specimen. Yet we're under the idea that we could create a better training program for those things. No, that's not happening.
That's that's so interesting because you're like, oh, I could create a better, like a better way of a cheetah. A cheetah doesn't have to warm up. A cheetah can just go and sprint 60 miles an hour, right?
Or you and I. However, there will be consequences if we haven't paid attention to our physiology.
Right. And that's what happens, though.
Body becomes a big thing to do before we actually engage, right? I'm not suggestive that you should just go out the door and go sprint it right now. Like, don't go do that. Like, go warm up. Get everything going. Get your nervous system on board. All that stuff. At any rate, it really comes down to like what people are willing to do, and they don't believe it's going to be as simple as it's going to be. But unfortunately, that's where the fundamentals exist. And I come in, I largely explain myself to people as I've recently, it's just become more and more. This is like, we've all seen the movie where they send in the guy who's the cleaner. That's basically what I'm doing. I just come in and I clean things up, and I'll look at limitations and clean them up. Whether you're a professional fighter I just had a guy who fought UFC Mexico City, had to get prepared for Mexico City, which is 7,300 feet. I also deal with altitude, so I know how to work with hypoxia. And he was taking a risk coming to me because everybody is telling him he's got to go down there 2 weeks early, and he didn't want to go down to Mexico City. And I'm like, you don't have to go if you just trust me. And you know who Andy Galpin is?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Andy's a good friend of mine. Andy's the one that brought Brian over to me. And so I worked with him and Andy on a program for him to get him ready. And he literally was there for 3 days. And he's like, whatever we did worked.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sparring, I'm fine, like nothing's, I don't feel anything. And I'm like, no, of course it worked. Like, as long as we're paying attention to this, to the signs, which for him it was, hey, I need you operating at 83% SpO2 at almost max heart rate. Can you do that? And at first he couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But we got him to that, and he was functional. So I
Mm-hmm.
knew he could handle it leading into something like that, right? So, but it's like, all right, what's the limitation? What are we coming in for? What do we want to train, right? With Kai, the guy who lost the body weight, all that stuff, basically like an endurance athlete, the guy's doing all this stuff, but most of it's harder than he should be going since he leads a stressful life. Where's the buffering mechanism for the mitochondria? Where's the buffering for the stress? For the nervous system, because we know if those mitochondria are churning, the parasympathetic nervous system is really on point, right? So we all know I mean, at least you and I know the connection between the aerobic system, the parasympathetic nervous system being more on board, all of that. That's why it's simply like, if I just go, hey man, take a deep breath, in through the nose, out through the nose, slow it down, you get calmer
Mm-hmm.
because we're now coming down. Parasympathetic nervous system comes back on board. We could prick your lactate before and after, and I guarantee it'd change. I watch it
It's
every day. I do this all day, every day. So
yeah. No, man, you're it- it- I this so in my PhD, one of the things like I focused a lot on skeletal muscle mitochondrial physiology, and
yeah,
not once did we talk about the interplay of the nervous systems in, say, mitochondrial function. So you were saying, oh, Phil, and you know about how the interplay between mitochondria. I'm like, actually, no. Like, tell me more about this because
yeah.
it is super interesting to think. And I like, so one of the things we did pride ourselves on is that we were trying to be integrative physiologists, right? All body systems are interplaying and interacting with each other at all times, right? We even have within the muscle, we have those nerves that communicate to the brain based on the signals that are coming to or from the muscle up to the brain. So I imagine there's some level of communication there, those afferent nervous or nerves. But I would love to. So please enlighten me a little bit about the connection.
Well, maybe I'll just open some doors. You have what you've studied, what you've been able to get a degree in, and is fantastic. So you definitely have far more education in that side of stuff. But what I've looked at is these crossover points of like, okay, well, what does it mean to be aerobic, right? Okay, so we've got the mitochondria. We're talking about lipid metabolism. We're talking about fat oxidation, and then we're talking about, then we can also have carbohydrate oxidation going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not just one or the other. But when we look at this, and when I started looking into respiratory physiology, it was because of respiratory physiology that I went and I started looking over at this. And it was like, okay, so the parasympathetic nervous system comes on board. If I am in through my nose, out through my nose, what I'm doing, the difference, and I was looking at this on a metabolic cart. I was
Mm-hmm.
literally sitting with a metabolic cart on.
Yep.
I'd talk metabolic cart on. I'd go for a walk with the metabolic cart on. We'd look at what the difference is between nose breathing, mouth breathing, and it was literally two different things going on.
Mm-hmm.
There were changes that were occurring as a result of that, which is what the change is happening with me right now when I talk versus when you talk. You're getting calm and you're paying attention and listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're calming down. I'm getting heightened into an arousal state, which has got my sympathetic nervous system more involved, which is now changing how I'm using energy. Doesn't mean I'm anaerobic, but I can tell you this, by looking at people who hyperventilate, and you can go look at all the literature like I have if you want, and you can even look into just go get a book on respiratory physiology and look at it. When you start over breathing, what happens? Well, we start to move CO2 out of the system and we start to onboard oxygen, but you can't bring on excess oxygen. We already have it.
Mm-hmm.
So all we're doing is retarding how the cell gets oxygen at this point. So it just goes into its normal daylight. Oh, you're limiting. So I'm going to go into it. And here's like, you know about the new research on the circulatory system being controlled by metabolism?
No, I do not.
Yes. So the metabolism controls the circulation, not the heart. The heart just acts as the hydraulic pump working in the way the heart's its own very own dynamic thing doing what it does.
Mm-hmm.
That said, um, did I lose you?
Oh no, we're good, I think.
Oh, there you are.
There
I
we go.
lost you for a second.
Okay. Yeah, it
Yeah.
says my internet is unstable. So if we did, I'll cut that out.
Perfect. Okay. Well, so anyway, the heart is a very dynamic thing I'm not going to get into, but I just read some new research this somebody put out that is that metabolism controls circulation, right? So from a circulation standpoint, if I'm contracting down, tightening up, right? Well, that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. It locks and unlocks channels, especially for it opens channels to the tissue to allow stuff in, right? Because when I start to get more sympathetic charged up here, things start to change, right? So locks down, like I was saying, if I'm over breathing or when I'm talking, I'm changing the dynamic pH. So my biochemically, I am changing. So the system automatically knows what to do and cinches down. Does that mean my full body goes into anaerobic activity? No,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm leaning more sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using more carbohydrate because it starts to become an easier source because the primary job of the sympathetic nervous system is to mobilize energy.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest thing to mobilize is glucose. So we move that into this.
And
Then
I will say
what's
too,
the easy how fast do we need to move that?
oh, I was gonna say when so when studies were looking at maximal fat oxidation, if there becomes a certain point where too much sympathetic activity is happening, so that's constricting capillaries in your adipose tissue, and your body is still actually having lipolysis occur, but you're not able to actually get it to the muscle to be used. So if you're in a constant state of high stress, it makes sense that perhaps you might be vasoconstricting those areas to your adipose tissue and then not allowing for that fat to actually be oxidized.
Bingo. You just entered so my buddy Kai just got an introduction into all of that, right?
Right.
By changing the dynamic in his adipose tissue, actually getting open capillaries to move the blood through there to pull the lipids out to use them for fuel. Like it all just starts to transcend down, but it takes some time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it stuff takes consistency is what it takes. So it typically coming in, it's like, I need you to be consistent with this for 3 or 4 weeks and then
Mm-hmm.
see where you're at. And then let's make a change. Let's look at the next limitation or the big red flag. Where's the flag that we can go after? And there's always going to be a flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we in my training experience, I also work for a company called Moxie Monitor. I saw that you guys actually, yeah. So I saw
Yeah.
hell yeah. No, I saw you had a publication come out of your the HPP, or is it HHP?
HHPF.
HHPF, that looked at saturation of the intercostal muscles.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, they use a Moxie monitor. So I wanted to drop that in there. So I work as a physiologist for them, and we kind of do a little bit of a limiter sort of style test just using the Moxie. And the way that I liken it to everybody who haven't heard of this concept is that if you're trying to assemble a car and you have, a door, a window, and an engine installation area, and it's all linear, it doesn't make sense if your installation of engines is limiting your throughput of cars being made to make your installation of doors better, because you're just going to have more cars still having to, get the engines installed. So you have to fix that first, and then you can address, oh, well, now the doors are slow, now the windows are slow. So you have to do that first in order to be able to get the system moving faster, and then you can address the next step.
Love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. That's such a great analogy.
You can steal that analogy because I definitely borrowed it from somebody else as well.
I instantly think of the bodybuilding community, but when you say that, but what that doesn't mean everybody in the bodybuilding community. There's plenty of bodybuilders who are pretty smart about things, but by and large, most people are not. Most guys are just simply in a body dysmorphia world that, are literally building better doors than building an actual car, right? That's all they're doing. But I also look at this in terms of like, I look at this as in terms of like metabolic flux, like how well that's health. That's telling me what's going on health-wise. Like, how can we actually look at that? And I think Moxie does an incredible job of being able, like, their technology has allowed me to actually go, oh, this is really what I was seeing. This is like, I can see how well somebody operates and understand exactly what's going on. Is it the delivery system? Is it the utilization system? What are we talking about? And how deep is that? Is this a pulmonary limiter? And the funny thing is anybody who I've come across in testing, it's weird. And because of the work I've been doing for the last decade, but they all have a pulmonary limitation, which is the first thing.
And it's interesting because I've talked to other people who do limiter testing, and that's what the general consensus is that most people, because they haven't been taught how to breathe, have limitations due to the mechanics of breathing. It might not be because of, like they're genetically predisposed to having, like limitations with how big their lungs are. It's just because they don't breathe properly. It's the same thing with, like, if you ever see like a beginner runner who has never run in their life, it's like, oh, there's a lot of things we can fix there, right? You wouldn't just say, oh, well, it's like because the pulmonary system doesn't seem to somewhat respond to training and like other things like that means nobody has a pulmonary limitation. It's like, well, if you're never taught how to do something, if you're never taught how to back squat correctly, you're not going to be able to do an effective back squat, right?
In essence, yes. I mean, what I've found out, at least my opinion is this, is that you can't, there are so few outliers in terms of freaks that, like, look, I don't have to teach a baby how to squat.
Right. Because they're just squatting down.
To teach a child how to run because they run perfectly when they first start doing it themselves. It's only when they start to mimic us or we constrain them into our world. And our world is this modern world. And this is what just goes right back to the whole, oh, we could train a lion thing. No, we can't. Like, no, we cannot. But the more we give ourselves the opportunity to allow this sensory system, which, by the way, we don't even know how many senses we have. We're just, we started with like 5. We've now it's something like 8, but maybe there's 20. It doesn't, we don't know. And we're never gonna know because that's just the reality of it. That doesn't mean I'm not interested. Like, I'm interested in the science and going after this and figuring this out. However, the sensory system as a whole is designed to communicate in a way to say, hey, you're off. And breathing is that thing that yoga figured out. I hate to be the bearer of bad news 5,000 years ago, where they were like, breathing first. You don't move faster than you can bring in air and bring out air. And if you can't do it through your nose, stop, or you're going to slow down, or I'm going to torture the shit out of you in some other position that you're not going to like. Right. And then, oh, wow, every martial art in the world picked it up prior to the advent of the UFC and, what we see today. But the fact of the matter is if we have a foundation to breathe, the real easy takeaway that I'm getting to right here is that if you actually can get yourself to breathe in and out of your nose under moderate intensities without trying to push it too hard, you will quite literally change the dynamics of how the system breathes. That paper you're talking about, with the one where they stuck it on the intercostals for the oxygenation, that paper helped me solidify this work that I've done, which is called the breathing gears. These guys out in Italy figured out that locomotor muscle, it's blood stealing, man. Like
Hmm.
it's literally blood stealing. That blood gets stolen from the legs and is diverted to the intercostals and diaphragm because these are the primary breathing muscle. These are more important than your legs when we're working. So if fundamentally we were to approach things from the breathing standpoint, and by nose breathing, it's not diaphragmatic breathing. This is another problem that we run into. And this is Western yoga as a problem, is they started talking about breathing. Oh, no, we're going to do diaphragmatic breathing. And then physical therapy clung on to this dumb statement and started using it. No, we're diaphragmatically breathing and moving our belly. No, that's not how it works, man. The diaphragm's always working. And if it doesn't, you're in an iron lung. Okay, that's called Odine's curse. Like that. That's not everybody's diaphragm works,
Hmm.
and nobody is doing it wrong. What they're doing is they're responding to stress. That's how breathing works. Breathing responds to stress, whether that be what I see, hear, feel,
Hmm.
or the tension of my life,
Hmm.
right? And then, or the positions I take every day and then limit myself in that capacity. And then I shorten the range of what it is I'm doing. I'll tell you right now, if I got you on a bike and started having you pedal easy and just had you breathing through your nose and just in for 2 seconds, out for 2 seconds, you can't go any harder than you can maintain that. You would get a lesson in what diaphragm and intercostals are. You would be sore if you've never actually done that.
Hmm.
And that was what I experienced when I started screwing around with this stuff, is I was like, oh my God, my diaphragm is sore. And I just trained for 20 minutes.
Hmm.
What's going on? Anyway, it takes care of itself. And I'm not really into this whole like, hey, let's restructure or fix what's broken. I don't think there's really anything broken. I think we're just responding to the stimulus that we're putting in front of us. That's it.
That was
Right.
it's interesting you say that because one of my areas of expertise or study was metabolic disease in terms of skeletal muscle insulin resistance. And I think, or one of my theories is that, well, insulin resistance uh is occurring because of the response to excess sugar and excess fat that are being constantly onboarded. So it's a response mechanism, not like a, oh, this developed over time disease mechanism. I could induce skeletal muscle insulin resistance in probably a day if I just overate like crazy. But the problem becomes when it's a chronic thing, because the
Yep.
chronic nature of most things, right, is that's what leads to the deterioration of the system. It's not like, oh, one day,
Yeah.
like I can guarantee you there's probably points within every single person's day, no matter how metabolically healthy you are, you have a little bit higher insulin resistance and a little bit lower insulin
My
resistance.
lipid levels are through the roof. My cholesterol's through the roof, and then it's down to normal levels. It's up, it's down.
Yeah.
All of this is going on. This is the problem, that we get fixated on certain things, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
no, man, like don't like what are we consistently doing? And that's exactly what you brought up. That's perfect. It's like, yeah, if you are chronically or consistently overeating, guess what? But if you're also chronically, consistently walking for, I don't know, 10,000 steps a day, you're going to probably be better off than the person who isn't.
Hmm. Exactly. And I think too, you said something about flux. I think, there's like different ways of quantifying this, but like metabolic flexibility, right, is like kind of something that gets thrown around a lot. And our ability to go from like the stressed, heightened state to the rest state, that's a flux, that's a flexibility. And I think that also, right, if the breath is tied into our ability to switch then to and from different substrates, right? It's like there's going to be times you're going to need a
Yes.
lot of carbohydrate. But the faster you come down from that and the faster you can switch, the better off you're going to be. Because
Yes.
then you're not wasting time like, oh, I got to bring my glucose levels down and then, something else happens and they come back up and then you got to bring them down and it takes a long time, right? If you can just be constantly switching because you're so uh physiologically in tune, right? I think that's kind of what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to tune their physiology rather than fix it because like you said, it's not broken. It's responding to
Oh,
all the inputs that are happening.
yeah, especially the one in the mind. And that was the reason why I came all the way back into performance with this is this when I got into the breathing thing, the respiration physiology stuff and the neurobiology of the breathing. I was like, all right, well now I need to look at stress physiology because this is all tied up. Like we breathe due to stress. That's the only reason we're taking a conscious breath is due to stress. Like CO2 goes up, higher CO2, acidic, nervous system responds to the acid, breathe, get it off, breathe, get it off, breathe. But unconsciously, that starts to change a lot. And look, there's more dynamics than that. I'm just giving a very basic thing. But in what you were just talking about, it's like this is about flux because flux is the ability of something to come in as one thing and it comes out as an entirely different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a constant of that, of it, and it's doing it in billions of times, like a second, especially in that, down at the mitochondrial level, right? Like the Krebs cycle is the most incredible thing that I think that I really hope one day that there's really a better explanation for the general population, that it gets taught, right? But the best explanation I got that I've ever heard was through Nick Lane, who wrote the book Transformer and Oxygen, which are two fantastic books. He's got a few of them, but he talked about flux. Metabolic flux is like, it's like a river, right? Like a river starts as like snow or water up on the mountain, but it still comes out water at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Flux is where it goes in is like, let's just say a VW bug, but comes out like a Ferrari. And it does that like billions of times a second. That's what's happening in the Krebs cycle. But the Krebs cycle is like, it's like an 8-car roundabout. And you need to think about it like if one car decides that it's not going to play the game or it's going to screw things up or start texting on its phone, things start to get backed up. Things start to change. And that's where the metabolic side of things starts to get changed, right? Well, the reason I got into all of this and circling back is just stress. People were coming to me because they were stressed the fuck out. Like, because I understood breathing and how to calm people down with breathing, like, was just weird. Like how I ended up doing that. And I hated it. Like, I'm like, I don't want to be here teaching you to breathe calmly and doing these things. I'm a performance junkie. So
Yeah.
I wanted to figure out how to artistically involve all of that. And that was the game is it was like, oh, this is really interesting. All the type A clients I've got don't have a high fat burn rate. Weird. Like they're all like 4 calories a minute or under,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, like your fat max is terrible. And like, I'm thinking that to myself. I wouldn't tell them that, but I'm like, we just want to get this up. Like, we just want to get this higher. And lo and behold, what happens when we get that fat max higher and higher and higher? Dude, I just feel like cognitively, I'm much more clear, like I'm more present with things. Yeah.
Yeah,
Weird.
because you're more flexible now. Like in times where you don't have carbohydrate on board because you didn't eat in the last hour or two, you are able to switch to more fat oxidation. And you're able to supply your body with the energy it needs to continue to run the roundabout in your mitochondria, whether that's in your brain, in your intercostals, in your muscle, anywhere. Because I'm pretty sure every single cell in our body has mitochondria. There might be one or two that don't. But
red blood cells don't, but
yeah,
like that, like there's the more you've got, the better off you're gonna be.
that man, you're just like kind of preaching to the choir because that, like I said, that's what I did my PhD on was.
Well, when you said what you did your PhD in, this is why I leaned.
Yeah. No, and that's no, I love that. It's it's confirmation bias at its finest, right? You just telling me that the mitochondria are, and no, I truly believe I wouldn't have
Mitochondria
studied them.
cannot function under high stress conditions all the time.
Yeah, it's like anything, right? It's like your body's going to fall apart if you're always under high stress conditions. And I get people who reach out to me who are like, "Oh yeah, I do this, this, and this," and it, And the type A individuals are always the ones that want to keep pushing it harder, because that's like, in society, how we derive value is like, well, I had to crush my workout. I had to crush it at my job. I had to do this, that, and the other, as opposed to, well, yeah, it's good, but you need the duality of life. You need the stress and you need the rest. And I think I saw something today from like Brad. Oh, I can never pronounce his last name, Strusberg or something along those lines. No, that's so he's a great research, but no, this guy is I think he's a psychologist at the University of Michigan, but he basically said, it's like we need to have the duality of life put into perspective. It's not just happiness, it's happiness and sadness. It's not just stress, it's stress and rest. And those are the things that are going to give us, fulfillment in life and everything. And it's the same thing, right? When we can't have that flux back and forth from carbohydrates to fat, from stress situation to non-stress situation, that's where we start to get these chronic bleeds of things that we then can't deal with. And then 30 years down the road, you have metabolic disease, you have high blood pressure, you have other things like that. And then everybody's like, oh shit, I got to change the ship. But changing a ship that's been going one direction and gaining momentum for 30 years is really hard to do.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about biology. Unfortunately, that's the beautiful thing about biology, is that if I actually hit a constraint for so long, if I do something for long enough, that path gets the system, as you know, always tries to find homeostasis. And if that balance point becomes something over here in order to start crippling over here, it'll do that. And then when it's time, it'll all shut down. But that's the life cycle of that process.
Right.
Versus, hey, how do we open up all the channels? What do those channels look like? What do they feel like? I like to use the word contentment. Contentment is fine. Like, you can be content and be sad. You can be content and be happy. You can be content. And that like, I am type A. I am an adrenaline junkie who chases like things I shouldn't chase at 50 years old at this point.
Yeah.
But maybe it shouldn't. I don't like to use the word should. But so at any rate, I really wanted to understand why I burned myself out the way I did. And that required me, and that happened in my late 30s, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was about your age when I started cranking real hard and real good. And I started, I'm like, yes, I could do all of this, and I can make more money, and I can do that. And oh, this is so great. And then, I had a big burnout, but I didn't realize why that burnout really happened. And that burnout happened not just because I like to take on more, but because I wasn't doing the things that were fundamental in the beginning, which when I was ultra running, if you go look at ultra running, just so we're clear, there's a lot of walking going on in ultra running.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of walking, a lot of hiking,
mm-hmm.
a lot of low level stuff. In fact, you're not running hard ever when you're doing more than
you shouldn't be, because if you are, you're headed down a very bad path.
Well, you're going to find out real quickly how to walk. Like,
yeah,
like it doesn't matter. But nonetheless is I had an extensive background in endurance leading into my high intensity life, and I buffered it for a long time, and then I cut it because of some injury stuff that was going on, right? So I just kept up with the high intensity strength and conditioning stuff, not paying attention to the fact that that endurance side of stuff, where the low level stuff existed, was creating the buffer. So when I started implementing the walking stuff back in my 40s, all of a sudden I started losing inflammation, getting leaner. Like, I mean, my head got clearer. All of these things started coming back. And now I can go as hard as I want whenever I want. Right? Like, and I really want to go hard sometimes. And I didn't even have the gas to do that before. Like, I didn't have the gas. Now it's just like, I pay attention, follow the process. I walk every morning, or I'm on a bike at a very like beach cruiser mode every morning. Right? And my mouth is shut, and I'm there for at least an hour. Right? At least. Then whatever's on the docket for that day for training, I'll do a little later after I've eaten. And I might in the afternoon go for a 4 or 5 mile walk with my dog. That is a lot of low level activity, but I've got probably 4 to 6 hours of activity going on a day, which is, if you want to go look into the research and start to look at things, is pretty much how we were designed. Like that was the evolution of what this system operated. And if you go look at Herman Ponsner's work, Burn wrote the book Burn. PhD looks at the Hazda Indians, the indigenous tribe over in Africa. They are like one of the last remaining like true hunter-gatherer like cultures. 4 to 6 hours a day. Just constant movement. They can drink like, I think it's something like 2 cups of like honey. And he's like, they drink it whenever they find it.
Yeah.
And they'll just drink this stuff like it's nothing, and they can get away with that and not put on any body fat. Of course they can't. They're not in a chronic state of over flooding themselves with honey every single day. Right. Like going back to what you're talking about. It's like, no, they're moving. They've got this resting metabolic rate that's just ticking. And that was what I was kind of, cluing into in the beginning, is like, I mean, I've got all this stuff looked at for myself where I'm roughly around 4,500 calories of output a day. Resting metabolic rate and activity levels. That's what I put out. It's almost impossible for me to eat that amount of food. Right. I have to try so hard to do that I can't. But I also enjoy really healthy food. Right. So it's like, I got a lot going for me at this point, right? Like in terms of health. And when I introduce this to people or athletes, it's like, hey, what are we looking at? And you said you had like a bunch of questions, or like 5 things for like endurance athletes, right? And it's like, oh yeah, simple thing is like, what's your biggest limiter? And are you willing to look at that? And that might be your mind, which that's typically the first thing that I address with everybody, is the mind is the only thing that lies. Physiology does not lie. Physiology tells the truth every single time. So if we just look at how you're thinking, what do you value? What do you want to get out of this? If health is the goal, then let me tell you what the limit's at, what limiter and how we work from there. And so for people, it's just like, they got to go look, what are they willing to prioritize? What's the fundamentals? What can they get at?
Yeah, no, I think we didn't get into 5, but I think starting with, what is your biggest limitation and what is the context like around what your goals are? Because it's way different if your goals are wellness versus if your goals are performance. But you can still address limiters. It's just going to be slightly different, right? Because if your mind is limiting you in a performance standpoint, right, then that's going to be slightly different than if your mind is limiting you from a wellness perspective. But no, man, I feel like we could talk, for hours and hours and hours, but I'm going to be very respectful of your time, because this was probably one of the most fun conversations I've had, and I don't even know how long. So I really appreciate it, Brian, for you coming on. And if you would indulge me here, so if you could give like just 4 actionable takeaways for individuals that just want to get better or want to start to reprogram their physiology a little bit right now for the last few minutes, what would those be, and how would you go about doing them?
If they're not doing this, minimum of 45 minutes a day of walking. If they are doing 45, make it 90.
And along with that, breathe in through the nose, out through the nose.
Nose only.
Yep, nose only.
Okay. So there's 1. Walking, nose only. If you can't walk, if something's impeding you from walking, fine. Go get a bike. You could buy a beach cruiser for less than $100, I bet you. Go ride that for the same amount of time. Just go cruise around wherever you live in neighborhoods. Just ride around for that exact amount of time with no goal other than exploring. And that's what the walking is, exploring. Right? Okay. So there's one, two. If you're really interested in understanding how to get to this real high level of oxidation of lipids, right? Like fat oxidation, go get on a bike of some sorts and get a heart rate monitor. Put a heart rate strap on, watch your heart rate. Start low. Start at a very easy level. Like, let's just say 60 watts for women, 80 watts for men. Okay. Bump it 10 to 20 watts every 5 minutes or so. Okay. When you go from easy nasal breathing to hard nasal breathing, that's that limit. Look at your heart rate. You want to watch that heart. Don't go above that heart rate with nose breathing on what you're doing for most of what you're doing, and stick there for about 3 or 4 weeks. Watch that change every 3 to 4 weeks. Retest that. Watch what happens. That breathing will change exponentially. Your breathing at night when you sleep will change exponentially. Your calmness during the day will change exponentially if you follow. I haven't had anybody come back to me yet who's said anything different. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 2, start working at getting your tongue on the roof of your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the back of your tongue, trying to drive it up there when you can think about it. Like if you're driving and you're just sitting in your car, just put it up there and try and drive the back of that tongue up into the roof of the mouth. You'll start to see that your tongue starts to naturally sit there. If it doesn't right now, that's okay. Its natural point is to sit at the roof of your mouth when you're not talking. That's going to help you being connected all the way down to that big toe. Okay. All right. So there's 3. 4, when you are done working out, do 3 to 5 minutes of just slow, controlled nasal breathing of a 4 count in, like a 6 count out. Your own 4 to 6. Don't bring a watch out. Don't bring a stopwatch out. Your own 4. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4 if you need to be faster, but slow it down as much as you can comfortably do that, and watch your heart rate. In fact, before you do this, watch your heart rate first, then do it and watch your heart rate. And watch what happens. And you're going to start to see how you can insert this sort of breathing throughout your entire day for just a minute or two in between things. Like when I get off this podcast, I'll probably just do some slow breathing. I'm going to go walk and do some slow breathing when I walk so that I actually bring it back down.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do this enough. And this is the killer, which is killing us, is because we're getting into these high arousal states, which have emotions, right, tied to them, and these emotional states aren't getting flushed out. They're just sitting. And so you're thinking, if we all understand, like cortisol, we talked about lactate a bit. Well, there's a relationship between if your cortisol is high, guaranteed lactate's high. So cortisol goes up, clear it. Just go for a walk, do some slow controlled breathing, get it to come down, calm yourself down, watch the stress go away. There you go.
Awesome. Those are absolutely phenomenal. I implore everybody to at least give it a try. I know I'm definitely going to, because this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, is how can I reduce stress, cortisol, other things like that throughout my life, just to get a little bit better body composition, because I'm just not happy kind of where I'm at right now. So, Brian, again, this is an absolutely awesome conversation. This is a complete surprise, super, super fun. I hope either to some extent we can either get you on the podcast again, or you and I can have more conversations offline. In the meantime, if people want to find you, where can they find you at?
Shiftadapt.com. I'm not actually, yeah. So shiftadapt.com. I'm not online. I go on Twitter, but like, I just use it to kind of pick up information on some of the people I follow. I like to follow.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I don't go on Instagram, even though I post on Instagram. I don't see anything. It's posted from afar, all of that
Right.
stuff. I stay off of social media. It's too much noise,
Hmm.
for me. And I've just learned from that. That's my thing. That said, shiftadapt.com has everything. We've got membership. We've got the gear system there. We incorporate breathing into all of our training,
Hmm.
all of it. We have breath essentials, things like that. All of these things, webinars that we've got, all of it there.
Awesome. Yeah, and if we didn't mention this, Brian's also doing some really cool stuff with his research foundation as well. So I'm excited to dig into a little bit more of like the research you guys are doing and other things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, there's a ton on that on the Health and Human Performance Foundation. If people are actually interested more in the breathing side of stuff,
Hmm.
like they want to take a deep dive, we've created Robert Fortune, who works with us, has created an extensive library for us on stuff that we've brought in, and that we've done ourselves.
Awesome.
So everything's there, and people can go look into that.
Awesome. And if you guys have any other questions in terms of breathing or, just mindset shift or anything like that, and you can't get in touch with Brian, you can always DM me on Instagram, Critical02, and I will try to either figure it out for myself and then let you know, or get in touch with Brian and then, communicate those questions and those answers that you have for him. But other than that, I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode, all about kind of unlocking your potential through changing your physiology and stuff. So Brian, thanks again for coming on the show, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.